Information on the strangers foreigners from the Contact Reports Part 2.
Contact Report 450.
I am sure that will be the case, since the report is not extensive. But it is still good if Injana comes, so there would not be a lot of accumulating reports. But what is so important and surprising that you want to tell me, as you explained when you called me?
These are the foreigners unknown to us who operate in the terrestrial airspace. We have not been trying to get in touch with these foreigners for some time now, as I explained to you some time ago. Nevertheless, this did not and does not prevent us from fathoming their origins and their efforts here on Earth. I also told you that these foreigners have a variety of flying apparatuses that can be observed again and again by the Earth humans. I must now explain that our ongoing research into the foreigners has revealed something that throws a somewhat different light on the whole thing. Only 12 days ago, we were able to find out that all the different types of flying apparatuses which we had assigned to the foreigners are not only applicable to them, because parts of the flying machines are in fact related to two other groups of extraterrestrial origin. But even with these, it was and is impossible for us to get in contact with them. Obviously, it is also the case that all three groups have nothing to do with each other and therefore have no contact with each other, as well as certainly no knowledge of our presence. It is true that all three groups have technology which does not allow us to make contact with them, but we have found out in this respect that this is because their technical devices and equipment are not capable of receiving our signals. But it is also otherwise because the material alloys of their flying apparatus reflect our signals and do not reach their tracking devices. In addition, and we have recently discovered this again, the entire technology of all three foreign groups is far inferior to our technology, which means for us that we must exercise a certain caution because we cannot judge the attitude of the foreigners. The low level of technology of the foreigners is obviously the reason why they have not been able to locate us with absolute certainty, and the low level of technology is also a sign for us that they are not yet capable of contacts in high form and therefore not yet able to contact us. According to their technology and evolution of consciousness, we have to assume they could not cope with our level of evolution of consciousness, which could lead to very dangerous reactions if contacts were made anyway. But as far as the three different groups of foreigners are concerned, it must be said that, according to our extremely intensive and precise investigations, they have no contact with each other and probably do not even know about each other. Various of our investigations point this out. And it is also absolutely certain that all three groups of these foreigners have no open contact whatsoever with any human being on Earth or have had such contact during the last 350 years or so. In this respect, we have carried out detailed investigations in the form of extremely extensive and precise research into the past, which has yielded no results whatsoever of any contacts between these three groups of foreigners for us and any Earth humans. In this respect, our apparatus and equipment, etc., are very accurate and infallible, so that we can say with absolute certainty that no contact whatsoever has taken place between these three foreign groups of extraterrestrials, or perhaps future Earthlings, which could also be the case, and Earth humans.
So there are three different groups of extraterrestrial or terrestrial futures here on our world besides you, who are wandering around. Your surprise has succeeded. But are they really all of them? Or is it not possible that there are others who are roaming around here?
No, other Earth foreigners are certainly not here, because our very highly developed apparatuses and devices work flawlessly, so that we would be informed by them about other present extraterrestrial or Earth future forms without doubt and with absolute certainty. The fact that we only discovered a few days ago that the foreigners are three different groups is due to the fact that things have come to our attention which have only now made us aware that the various flying apparatus do not belong to one group alone. So we went back into the past by investigating the whole thing for about 350 years, and we came across the fact of the three groups and were able to base our present research on it, which gave us and continues to give us the proofs of the three groups of foreigners.
What I would still be interested in regarding the three foreign groups of extraterrestrials or future Earthlings, or whatever they may be, is the following. Do you have any information on how many different flying apparatus each group has? And secondly, have you gained knowledge about what these three groups are doing here on Earth? And thirdly, it would be interesting to know why you have only now come to the conclusion that three different groupings exist. Fourthly, why did you not establish this fact when you went about 200 years into the past and researched everything concerning the first group of foreigners?
The fact that these are three different groups was only discovered a few days ago, because we received new devices and apparatus through the Meier, through which we were able to scan and examine their airplanes unnoticed by the foreigners. These new devices also serve to scan the airspace much more precisely for all kinds of objects than was possible with our previous devices. How?
Excuse me if I am interrupting you. By probing and examining, I assume you mean scanning, as we call it here, right?
That is what it means, yes. Well, we were able to scan the aircraft with the new devices and equipment. And we also noticed that the foreign aircraft have three different basic techniques, which differ from each other in such a way that they could clearly only be assigned to three different technical development stages. In the end, it also turned out that the crews of the aircraft of each of the three types of technology are so fundamentally different that they have no relationship whatsoever to each other. In part, we were able to fathom the state of the evolution of consciousness of all three groups, whereby this state has three different and from each other blatantly striking evolutionary levels. In doing so, we also fathomed the fact that the three groups have no knowledge of each other and therefore no contact with each other.
So you know more than you first said.
You did not ask for it either.
I always have to ask. Then please continue to tell me what to say to my questions. I am also interested to know if you did not come into conflict with your directives when you scanned the crew's consciousness levels.
Of course, there were no conflicts in this respect, because we are allowed to explore the consciousness levels of humans, because this has nothing to do with penetrating those areas of personality that we are not allowed to explore. But to your questions, as far as the number of aircrafts registered by us of the three groupings foreign to us is concerned, the total number registered by us amounts to 216, although we do not yet have any data as to how many flying apparatus belong to which grouping in each case. However, we do know the number of different flying apparatus, whereby this amounts to 74 of them, and this in total in relation to all three groupings.
And again, a question on this. These ships or aircraft, by your designation, are they in the airspace all the time?
No, that is not the case because they disappear again and again, although we cannot determine where to. Then they just suddenly return without us being able to find any coordinates. And as far as the question of what these three alien groups are doing here on Earth is concerned, I can only say that we do not know. We have made one observation, however, and that is that at least one group is doing atmospheric and geological research. But as far as your question is concerned, why we did not recognize during our first investigations up to the time of about 200 years ago that the for us foreigners are three different groups and completely different human life forms, that is because we were not yet in possession of the scanning devices and scanning apparatus, by which we could have clarified everything more exactly. Only on our request did the Meier agree to make their high technology available to us, which enabled us to clarify everything. Although we have been in possession of scanning equipment for a very long time now, it was not possible to scan the aircraft and their crews with this equipment due to certain radiation from the foreign aircraft, because our scanning pulses were always reflected. Today we know that the reason for this is the material alloy of the foreign aircraft, and strangely enough, all three groups of aircraft, although they are clearly not connected to each other and obviously have no knowledge of each other. Also, before you ask, we couldn't find out if the three alien groups maintain any stations on Earth, because even with our best and newest equipment, we couldn't find anything like that.
Aha, so it is like that. It would be nice if I did not always have to ask first to get more details. For my part, I thought, according to your earlier statement, that you were no longer concerned about the foreigners, which you have now done anyway. Isn't that a contradiction?
I was not aware that you wanted to know more about this. You always ask. No, our clarifications do not contradict what I told you, because my words only referred to further attempts to make contact with the foreigners. So my speech was not about not seeking more information about the origin and nature of the aircraft and their crews.
Of course. I usually ask when something interests me. And with regard to the fact that you no longer seek contact with the foreigners, I simply misunderstood something. Pardon, my friend.
Contact Report 576.
On the 2nd of November, during a private conversation, you told me that you had received new techniques from the Sonarn that might give you better insights into the four groups that operate around Earth.
That is correct, but I cannot talk about it in detail because I have to keep silence about the exact activities and processes as well as the details of the new technology, at least officially. We ourselves have been reluctant for some time now, as a result of disinterest, to investigate the background and existence of the four groups. In September of this year, however, something special happened which made it necessary for us to take another look at the four groupings, or at one of them in particular. This prompted us to look for technical aids from Asket's friends, the Sonarn, in order to get to the bottom of the particularities we had noticed. As a result, during the last month, with the means made available to us by the sonar people, we have carried out in-depth investigations and have thus obtained important information about those particular aspects of the grouping to which we were particularly interested. As a result of our investigations in this regard, we have been able to clearly establish that the grouping in our interest is not of terrestrial origin, but is, in fact, Earth foreigners. With the new sonar technology, we were also able to penetrate the materials of their round, triangular and boomerang-like flying apparatuses, and use special equipment and devices to get inside their flying apparatuses without them being able to register this. In this way, we gained knowledge of the life forms themselves inside their flying apparatus and also of their technology, which is still inadequate compared with ours. We were also able to take a look at records which provided us with a lot of interesting information, also in this respect that it has been impossible up to now for the Earth foreigners to locate or otherwise recognize our Playaran flying machines. So we have remained unknown to these strangers to this day, which will remain so, because we continue to shield ourselves and do not wish to have contact with them, as our directives also prohibit us from doing, as a result of certain serious negative observations we have been able to make about this species. Our linguists were also able to decipher the language and written language of the Earth foreigners in less than 9 days, which also allowed us to gain extensive knowledge. We were also helped in this by tiny recording devices which we were able to beam into the interior of the foreign flying apparatus, which provided us with a great deal of interesting information, and which could also not be registered by the foreigners because their technology in this respect is still extremely deficient. In the end, we were also able to determine the origin of the Earth foreigners, so that we now know where this group is going, or from where it came to Earth and continues to come here. I am not allowed to say more about this.
This is a lot, and I hope it will not harm you if these strangers find out about it. It is certainly interesting for many people to learn about it if I mention it in the report of the conversation.
You can do that without hesitation. And you can also publish it in a bulletin if you want to, because the alien species can only take note of what I have explained, but that's all it can do, because it cannot locate us in any way, and therefore cannot harm us either. We also know from our investigations and studies that these Earth foreigners are not able to penetrate our space-time structure.
This is directly reassuring to hear. But thanks for your interesting information. But what is now with the other three groups?
For the time being, there is no reason for us to try to clarify their situation. An interest could only arise if special occurrences would make further clarifications and investigations seem important.
Contact Report 770.
We very well have, and that lies in the fact that since time immemorial, we have not allowed ourselves to be recognized by other foreigners, but only in isolated cases, as happened in connection with Svath, and also in the early days with members of the Figu groupings.
You mean that none of the foreigners could ever locate you, not even your ancestors?
Yes, it has.
You should not be so open about it because...
Well, I can leave out what has been said so far when I call up the conversation.
What has been said should really...
What was said before I will already, because the foreigners. So I am going to do the...
We really need to remain undetected by the foreigners because we can...
I did not think of that.
Honestly, neither did I. It is only now that I understand why you are so keen to...
Yes, and that is all we should talk about.
So when I retrieve it, I will just write down what's necessary. That is probably all that needs to be said. But I am interested in what you have to say regarding the... I will settle for that.
Contact Report 771.
That will be at the end of August or at the beginning of September. The whole thing is taking more time than was foreseen, because it is a matter of our safety that we really remain unrecognized in the face of the foreigners. We've kept it that way for millions of years, but technology doesn't stand still. Consequently, we need to update ours, which we're doing together with the Soniers.
Actually, we're not supposed to be so open about it, because the foreigners have their ears everywhere.
That danger never existed and never exists, which is what you are worried about, because we never let our guard down. Besides, our dimension must remain protected.
Svath also held that way. But he still kept in touch with various Earthlings.
That is also our way of behaving, which is why we only maintain contact with you. That would also have remained the same when we tried to establish our relations with America. These would have been followed by Russia, Europe, China, and Australia, but everything could only have been done through your mediation because we would never have made a personal appearance.
Contact Report 772.
This is also correct, and it also does credit to the Figu Association because it calls itself a free interest group. And only when every member is really free in every decision and action can there be talk of free and free eye. And this is indeed the case with you. But the other things I have said also correspond to the truth. And that you don't want to talk about it, I understand, but it is not correct. Because those who are only apparently vaccinated lull themselves into a false sense of security against the rampantly spreading disease, which will continue to take its victims far and wide. As for our offer to the USA at that time, I was also partially informed about that, as well as that everything was to be extended with the Soviet Union. What about the attempt at that time? Lee Elders being the man who was to arrange everything? I have some knowledge of that. But the whole connections are not familiar to me. So I have become aware of that, and I know that it remained a pointless attempt that shall never have a sequel again. We had to recognize that Earth humans, with the exception of very few persons, are still so far removed from conscious adulthood that it is useless to appeal to their intellect and reason. This alone is proved by the inadequacies of the state leaders through their wrong decisions and courses of action, which they impose on the peoples, always wanting to be more knowledgeable than true knowledge itself. They are also very emotional and agitated instead of calm and thoughtful. Consequently, they make and carry out their decisions and orders according to the emotionality welling up in them. So truly, although they ponder over it for a long time, make rash decisions and act hastily, the results are always wrong. In their uncontrolled emotionality, they cause immense damage, wage wars against other peoples and states, impose sanctions on other peoples and states which never hit those who should be considered the real culprits, namely the state leaders. In any case, the sufferers are the peoples who have to endure all the effects of the sanctions, but never those who provide all the cause for the pathologically stupid sanctions, namely the state leaders from the lowest to the highest ranks. Those non-adult state officials who dare to invent the sanctions that can be called idiotic and order them against reason and rationality also act stupidly and thoughtlessly. Equally stupid are the state leaders and the military leaderships, as well as the airlines of all states, etc., who try to negate and ridicule all reports that deal with observations and experiences of and with the foreigners, that is to say with their flying objects, the so-called UFOs, and other incidents with them. Moreover, things are kept secret which should be made known to the public in this respect, but which, through secrecy, let the peoples run into the unknown. Consequently, they are no more and no less than being led on a fool's rope, as you once said. It is also to be said that we keep ourselves so far away from these foreigners, we call them that, although we know where they come from, that they can never locate us, and have not been able to do so up to now, and never can. We are concerned about that and will remain so for all time. Consequently, we will also never make known our dimension, as well as in which universe our home is.
I know that, but the whole thing
That is not a problem for us because we know very well that you are silent about it and that you will never name it. You may also call up this passage of our conversation and write it down. What I have explained, the foreigners can take nothing from it. Consequently, the knowledge of our existence will remain as obscure to them as before. They will not be able to ascertain anything from us, as has been the case since time immemorial and will remain so. But if I continue to think, then all the earthly feminine and masculine decisions can be further recognized by me, which are completely wrongly conceived and implemented with regard to ideas, proposals, inventions of new ordinances, directives, decrees, laws, prohibitions, and taxes, which are thought up by newly appearing power grabbers in the state leaderships. Proposals and demands, etc., which are intended to erect a monument to them and perpetuate themselves in the round of those who bring regulations and laws, and with which the books of laws, ordinances and rules, etc., are to fill up and force human beings for all time to adhere to them ironclad and to turn them into obedient citizens who no longer dare to speak out against the wrong thinking and wrong acting authorities, if I may use your expression for once. What is still objectionable relates to the leaders of the state in their own country, and this in the manner that 1. The so-called leaders of the state are not persons who deserve this designation of right, and 2. Because they are in fact ignorant of state leadership, who overestimate their ability to lead a people and are in no way capable of doing what they, as leaders of the state, ought to be able to do in terms of thinking, deciding, and acting alone. According to exact knowledge, we know of no earthly state which would be run without any fault and without any state-responsible misdecisions and maltreatments in such a way that no lawful or case-by-case decisions, as well as wrong and grave injustices, would come to light. Even courts, from which justice should be expected from the ground up, pass and defend doubtful judgments, which are so recognizably unjust that even minors must recognize that decisions are not made according to justice, but according to sympathy, according to the granting of money, according to the form of lies and slander, or according to the manner of the plaintiff or the defendant, but not according to justice. Thus, financial misconduct, slander, murder, and other violence are not punished uniformly, but according to the circumstances, but not according to the law, which demands a certain punishment for a punishable act, no matter what circumstances have led to it. Political wrongdoing is equally wrong, but in a different way. For example, by imposing sanctions on a state for whatever reason, which, however, do not affect the wrongdoers, namely those responsible for the state, but the usually innocent people. All this, and much more injustice, is often done in the name of the Lord, in the name of the non-existent God, whose name is good enough for every outrage to humiliate and unjustly punish human beings, or to punish wrongdoers, malefactors or otherwise punishable persons not according to the law, but according to the circumstances, and not according to the existing law.
Contact Report 774.
It used to be the same with our peoples. The human beings, as a result of their evolved knowledge, knew very well that they were thereby acting unjustly and erroneously, but their confused and false conception of self-worth made them generate misleading false feelings, out of which they reacted completely wrongly and accusingly attacked those who pointed out their wrongdoing to them. Human beings only changed this when they came under the influence of the sphere known to you and aligned themselves according to its teachings, which on the other hand led many to suicide who were unable to cope with the whole of the teachings.
I was aware that many suicides were the result, and also that the reasons for them were manifold. But how these were individual is beyond my knowledge. What interests me, however, is your long absence, during which a lot happened. While it is not my way to ask you or any of you about what was the reason for your absence, you have promised me that you will give me more details when you will be back.
That is correct, and it concerns our security, which we have always maintained. The latest technology has come up in such a way that it became necessary to have a learning session, which took a long time and which I could not skip. It also included the security against the foreigners who work on Earth, but whom we avoid because our directives forbid a connection with them for certain security reasons. This would also have been the case if...
I understand that completely, but I am always amazed that Svath could still maintain contact with one Earthling or another without the foreigners noticing. It was the same when we were in the past, as with the giants. It was probably in present-day Georgia and Ecuador and other places, as well as with the lesser Earthlings in normal time in Indonesia. Simyase also did this with 2 or even 3 Earthlings, also with others, so also with Jekieli and me together, it happened in the same way, and it was not noticed by the foreigners just as they are not able to detect our contacts, at least not so far.
It will also remain so because their technology is very far behind ours, which we share with the Sonaiern in this respect.
Aha, so still primitive, as we would say. But I have a question anyway. What do you actually think about these Sonaiern? For my part, I only know Yanarara.
They are from our lineage that goes back millions of years.
Oh, so it is more than friends then, as Simyase, or was it you, once said? But that answer is enough for me. What is still not clear to me, however, is that this refers to the foreigners. These are unable to locate you even when you are with me or when I am walking around with you.
No, they cannot, even if they were standing right in front of us. We are...
Then how come my ex saw you in the parlor? How did it happen that Elsie was able to see Quetzal in my office once? And how did it happen that Silvana was able to take the photos of Quetzal on the center staircase?
That was our carelessness because we thought we were safe from observation. And with your wife at the time, I'm not sure if she really saw me when I was looking for you in the house, or if she just saw me as a shadow and embellished everything.
I can imagine. But what happened to Engelbert and Quetzal at the contact in the area of the Seckler?
That was effectively a carelessness on Quetzal's part as well.
Then you must also be more careful, also towards the Earthlings.
We have learned that by now, because we were really too careless towards the Earth's humanity, but not towards the foreigners, which has increased now because we have new security measures, but I cannot openly mention them.
Then I will not openly ask about it any further in that regard.
Contact Report 775.
They have to mention Figu immediately in the first place. It is interesting. It just cannot happen without it, because it seems that the Figu does not give journalists a moment's peace. One way or another, they always have to refer to you and to us. Quite obviously Figu, and we do not give them a moment's peace. It is interesting to note, by the way, that of late the foreigners attract more interest again among the Earth's human beings, especially among those of the space surveillance.
Contact Report 779.
There you are. Greetings and welcome, dear friend. Ptah, I have some questions today that I have actually already brought up but needed you to answer them again. Because I know that you do not make much of an effort to deal with such things, it is almost embarrassing for me to come back with the same thing, but in the meantime it has come to light that I may have answered something wrongly, which is why I am coming back to the same thing. It is about whether you know the name Antonio Verzi or something like that, because this man says that he has contacts with extraterrestrials. I also have the name of a man who calls himself Antonio Solitaria, but I really do not know what this name is. Maybe this is the correct name of this Verzi?
First of all, greetings also, and thank you for your welcome. You really did ask me about this name when I was with you 8 days ago. No, the name is not familiar to me. I already told you that, because on the one hand, I am not so concerned with the frauds of alleged contactors with extraterrestrials that I would know all the names of such persons. On the other hand, persons who have had real experiences with foreigners do not know who they were actually dealing with. Consequently, a person accuses himself of lying if he claims that he is in contact with extraterrestrials, because such contacts are not known to us, and precisely because we do not concern ourselves with them. If we have knowledge of this, then it is only based on coincidences, but these are rare, because we do not explicitly deal with such things, which are usually based on lies and deception. My statement, that is, what corresponds to my personal observations and experiences, are such that I could not affirmatively answer alleged contacts of Earth's humanity with extraterrestrial life forms, which is what you are asking about. Besides, we are really only concerned specifically and exclusively with what arises around you and your person. As far as other matters concerning alleged Earth's human connections, that is to say, contacts with alleged extraterrestrials are concerned, that is not in our interest. Consequently, we also do not deal with it. This was done by us in former times, when the interest on Earth among human beings was practically a time of extraterrestrial flying objects, the so-called UFOs. In answer to your questions, we endeavored to do this, and found that it was indeed the case with certain Earth humans that they were abducted and examined by foreigners, etc. But that actual contacts took place, like ours with you, we could not establish. On the other hand, we know very well that it corresponds to correctness of observations of flying objects of the foreigners, as well as that there are very good photographs and film recordings as well as other recordings of foreign flying objects, which have been made by Earth humans and are still being made today, which are genuine. Also with the modern speaking devices called mobile phones. Military evidence of such photos has also been produced, but this is usually kept quiet about, and this fact is denied, which is very ridiculous, because the fact still exists and can be proven. But what the real background of the foreigners is, that is their business and none of ours. Consequently, we do not concern ourselves with it, and also do not make ourselves recognizable to them, which our technology allows in such a way that our existence remains completely unrecognizable to them. We really do not want to have anything to do with these foreigners in any wise, although we have explored exactly what and who they are in the first place. This is also known to you.
Should we not even be open about who above all, and where the foreigners are actually from? I mean, where they are from.
You know that our directives forbid that, and you have to abide by that as well.
Well, it was just a question.
Which you should not be asking.
It is good. Maybe it really was thoughtless.
I guess it was.
I guess it was, yeah. But what about when you come to my office? This is once the question that I was asked a long time ago, and someone was worried about it. But I always put it aside because I had simply forgotten about it, and besides, I did not want to talk about it openly. But now it has come up again. Is there not the possibility that the foreigners, or for example a secret service, etc., can eavesdrop or see what is being said, or move through some means? That obviously causes problems, because it was also said that they were concerned that someone might break into my office if any of you are here in my office at the moment.
That is so secured from the outside, and I am allowed to say that because it does not compromise absolute security in any wise. Also, however, you must not openly divulge and spread what I will explain to you under the condition of secrecy. It is really the case that it is impossible to eavesdrop on our conversations, even if hidden listening devices of a futuristic nature are brought into play, because we are careful to ensure that everything is really safe for you and for us. This is because at all times of contact visits and conversations, etc., your workspace is made external by our technology in such a way that times and events become when you enter your workspace. So any eavesdropper or observer will only hear and see what has happened in your workspace, but never what happened when one of us was in your... This has been set up since everything started at the center.
Contact Report 786.
This is in addition to the complete failure of those in power, who have always done the wrong thing since time immemorial. Because the government incompetents are not clever enough, but only have a big mouth, many more Earthlings will perish in the far future, not only through further rampantly spreading diseases, which will inevitably come as a result of the ever more rampant overpopulation, but also because of the wars triggered by the incompetent and power-hungry rulers. This is in addition to the uncertainty about what the foreigners will do, whom the Pentagon in the USA wants to get under their skin again with a new task force, as Ptah recently told me. The Blue Book was only the beginning of the whole thing, in which Mr. Weaver, Wayever or Wever, I do not remember his name exactly, was also involved, whom I met together with Sim Ya Se, who also told us that he had to say exactly the opposite of what really corresponded to reality and truth. He was forbidden to speak and was not allowed to say what the real truth was.
Contact Report 788.
We are aware that we are still very susceptible to such foreign influences, which is why our directives are also geared to this and protect us from falling back into the old and evil behavior patterns of our ancestors on the one hand. On the other hand, by prohibiting contact with foreign humanities, they prevent what you call rubbing off. We consciously defend ourselves against foreign influences by strictly adhering to the directives which command us that other human beings, such as Earth humans, may only be contacted in isolated cases and also only in rare cases when we can be sure that we have no foreign influences to fear. Therefore, in our own interest, we do not maintain any or only brief conversational contacts with Earth humans if this is of particular interest to your mission or of some importance to yourself. This was already the case with my father Svath, but it has also remained so, and will remain so as long as you are here. We Plejaren are also only human beings, if I may say so, and we are not perfect beings, as many Earth humans assume or believe. Even if we have a much more highly developed technology that enables us to travel in time and space, just as we also have various other higher possibilities than Earth humans, we are still human beings and therefore not inserted into perfection, but afflicted with faults and disadvantages, according to which we also have to learn, experience and learn, as this is inherent in every living being and will never end until that time when this ends through the eons of time, when our creation energy, which animates us and also develops us further, one day unites with the energy of the being absolutum. A behavior on our part and on your part with regard to contacts with Earth humans is rare, but you have had to keep silent about it for reasons of safety for the persons. And you also have to keep silent at present, and that as long as they still walk through their lives or will continue to walk. This has been preserved and will therefore continue to apply until the temporal life of the Earth humans concerned will be over for them, for which the reason is known to you, which I do not need to mention specifically. In the same way as we have to behave towards Earth humans in accordance with our directives concerning contacts, this applies equally to other humanities in our universe, as well as in foreign universes and in foreign creations. This is also the reason why we must, under all circumstances, keep a low profile towards the foreigners who have been present in Earth's space for a very long time, and to whom we must not make ourselves known. The justifications for this are the same as those that are otherwise also valid for other humanities of other life-bearing planets.
Contact Report 795.
No, because they belong to our Federation, and so they are not allowed by our directives to intervene. What they are allowed to do is merely as they have done, several times in the center, with regard to working against forces that fall outside the acute and direct influence of Earth humans or also inhabitants of other planets. Interestingly, the foreigners also adhere to this, who now and then make their presence known on Earth by their appearance in the terrestrial skies, but with whom we are neither in contact nor give them the possibility of perceiving us in any form at all.
So the foreigners cannot locate you, just as the Earthlings cannot. This was already told to me by Svath, whose presence on Earth was known only to those whom he contacted directly. And he also explained at that time that this has been kept this way since all time since Pleiaren came to Earth, the reason for which, as he said, was that the foreigners could not find their way to the Pleiaren in the Ankar universe. It seems to have remained that way to this day.
Contact Report 799.
I am glad you like them and use them. But tell me, should we not say what is actually connected with the mention of foreigners, what is behind it, as well as that it is, and that?
The whole of the connections of the foreigners we must continue to keep quiet, for far too much depends on what reaches far into the future and will change everything in such a way that, however, there is still silence about that, which you must abide by as before.
But I guess I can bring that in and write down what we talked about, cannot I? I am sure it would also help me for not being asked anymore what and who these foreigners actually are and what their purpose is.
You really mustn't say anything about it because it would also be dangerous for your safety. Your knowledge of the whole of the connections of the foreigners, as we call them, so as not to have to speak out what they are really about, that should stay with you and not get any further, because it is really too.
It is good, do not worry. I have kept quiet about it all my life, because Svath already explained it to me in a similar way to you, and much more besides, as also that Asket and your daughter Simyase showed me some things without the foreigners being able to notice anything. I hid it so deep in my memory that it did not even come out when you tried to bring out my knowledge about it through hypnosis.
That was really very tedious, but unsuccessful, I know.
So I guess that is the way it is going to stay.
I also know that for sure. However, it is...
But which must not be said openly. In any case, I have already been made a promise by Svath that I would keep silent about it, and never mention the true factors and the three unless you would affirm in the distant future that I may speak about it, which you deny. So the promise given to Svath is something that must never be broken, otherwise I would be a traitor to myself. That is why I asked you, because if you had said yes, the promise would no longer have been valid.
You have kept silent about these foreigners, as well as about many other things, all your life, and you will continue to do so. I have no doubt about that.
Contact Report 812.
That is always one of those things, where you have to be careful to look at how and what is allowed to be said. Sometimes it is really difficult, also because of the foreigners that we just call them that, because they are just foreign to the Earthlings, even though we know about them. Especially what the high government official, Weaver or something his name was, I cannot remember exactly, explained to you, Wendell Stevens and me in confidence, and then also said that he has to lie in public and hide everything.
Yes, who and where the foreigners are must be kept quiet about because...
It is all right, because I am going to keep quiet, and I am certainly not going to say anything more about it than I have said so far. So I will be careful not to say who and where the foreigners are. I will not say anything about that. Let those grit their teeth about it who put everything in a false light and deny it with ridiculous explanations, like Tim Printy, who was paid for it, or whatever his name is, which I also cannot remember exactly.
Contact Report 814.
We do not have to talk about that. It was simply the end of the whole thing, which was planned and could have been. This also made the whole thing with that part of the foreigners, the ones from unnecessary, that a contact should be attempted with them, who have been circling around in the earthly skies since time immemorial, but who have never been able to detect your presence, and not until today. Although your ancestors came to Earth some 25 million years ago, and you can still come from them unrecognized and do your work. It is quite something that you Pleiaren have been able to move and stay away from the foreigners in such an unrecognized way for 25 million years, by which I mean those foreigners who, according to your explanations, came from. The other foreigners, we can leave them out, because
We will continue to exercise all necessary caution, as against some as against others, also against Earth humans, because there is still, unfortunately, the danger of...
Excuse me, but you do not have to say it, for it is also clear what would be, for you would be hunted down on one side as well as the other. Both the Earthlings are keen on your technology, which also includes the second group of foreigners, as well as the foreigners from who could optimize their highly developed technology in such a special way that they could locate things that are still unlocatable even for them, get hold of you, copy your technology, and then unexpectedly penetrate into your dimension. As it is now, however, their aeroflyers remain UFOs, which certain Americans, this is of course denied and kept secret, just like, of course, the military, secret service, and governmental machinations, which would be so monstrous for the ordinary citizen that, if he knew, he would tear out all his hair or kill himself.
Contact Report 819.
But what is also to be said, beyond the faith in mendacious religions, is that many Earthlings are so arrogant and overbearing that they hold the insane view that they are unique and alone in the whole universe, which is why they also deny the foreigners and their flying apparatuses, the so-called UFOs, that is to say, unknown flying objects, or simply silently doubt their existence. Although the excitement about them has largely died down in recent years, now and then I am asked about them by all kinds of human beings from all over the world, as a result of which I have to deal with them. Unfortunately, I am not allowed to give information about what it is all about, where the foreigners with their UFOs and their occupants come from, what they actually are and want, because in doing so I would not only endanger myself and everything around me, but also you, Pleiaren. You also shield yourselves from the foreigners, as we call them, because you must not be discoverable for them. The reasons for this should be understandable to all those inquirers who think things over and think for themselves. Consequently, they can work out for themselves what would happen if Plejaren could be located by the UFO occupants.
Contact Report 826.
As Svath said, the majority of Earth humans and even life forms with highly developed forms of consciousness of very modern civilizations on foreign planets of our cosmos would not understand this, even though they would be able to travel through world space and travel in time. Since you can shield yourselves, that is to say, protect yourselves against any sighting and locating, even those who have traveled far away from the depths of the cosmos, as well as, are not able to perceive you. That they or the Earthlings could even get hold of you remains as impossible as that the really dead can rise again, for the foreigners and the human beings of the Earth cannot penetrate into your universe. And besides, you are careful, just in case, that your transitions into your space-time structure, that is to say, into the universe, cannot be determined.
Contact Report 828.
All this is known to me, but I kept silent about it and never told you what was directed against you even without your knowledge, and what all was done against you to make you impossible worldwide, which would also have had the consequence that you would have moved away. Even though we had never spoken about it, I must do so now and explain to you all that really happened when the first contact with you was made in Hinwil in 1975, with my daughter Simya Se. She was not the only person who dealt with you, for at the same time 2 personalities from Zilton were also present, but they did not make contact with you, just as they protected themselves from any sighting and recognition from the foreigners and the military earthly observers. This also remained so until the moment when, through our impulses, everything came to pass with the making of the film. This necessitated that the Ziltoner, who had hitherto only performed their task as silent observers, had to be augmented by a larger staff, whereby this staff exists to this day, and a larger number of them also occupy themselves with having a negative effect on the energies to which you are exposed in your work and which greatly impair all your efforts. As a result of the Ziltoner observations, we were constantly informed of everything that was going on and happening, but we wisely concealed this from you, for we knew from glimpses of the future what was going to happen. So it was not that I did not know everything, but I kept quiet and never told you anything about it, which, as you say, was done behind your back. Everything that was directed against you were also active in this way to make you morally and psychologically ill, and to break you to such an extent that you would give up your mission, was also directed by this still has an effect today, especially on your work, which you have to do on the computer, and also handwritten. However, you did not deviate from your mission and remained steadfast. Even though you became very ill and only stayed alive through Eva, as I know very well about what happened in her workroom, even though you never spoke about it, as you did about many other things. And because we never spoke to each other about these incidents, and about the matters concerning America and the persons there in a private way, it happened that Simya Se, my daughter, was then able to free you from everything, so that you could go along in good health again. So from the very beginning, we did not inform you that the Ziltoner were present when you had already taken up your mission in Hinwil. They also remained unrecognized by you, although they were constantly present and supervised everything. So we were constantly and uninterruptedly informed about everything that happened around you, how you were lied to, cheated, deceived, and exploited. So we also knew about every intrigue, lie, slander, and everything in general that did against you, as well as other persons were induced to do in order to make you fickle, impossible, and sick, and to portray you as a fraud. And all this happened against my better judgment because from the very beginning it was only a matter of, so from the very beginning it was only pure calculation. And when after years finally those persons, that it was sometimes very difficult for me to see you suffer and still remain silent, which also happened to my daughters Simyase and Pleja in equal measure. But our silence was really good anyway, because you did not let yourself be distracted by it and always devoted yourself all the more and more intensively to your hard work and did what had to be done. Only through this did I myself learn and understand that only the transmission of the energy in the long succession of rebirths of creation energy, which has developed since Nocademian's existence and has evolved up to the present day, has enabled you to exist. But we really knew everything, but I had to remain silent.
Contact Report 829.
You should not hide your light under a bushel. But it is incomprehensible to me that this subject is not taught in schools, since it is something that actually belongs to general knowledge. But enough of that. Perhaps we should say a few things about the foreigners, because it is probably correct for me to call up this conversation and write it down so that it is accessible to all who are interested. When I think that all the UFOs that are being sighted around the world, as well as the foreign bee.
What you are saying, though, that's supposed to...
That I know, and I will also just dot it.
Good. We are absolutely careful, as all our ancestors were, and have been since they came into this universe, that we cannot be observed or located under any circumstances. Consequently, we have not allowed ourselves to be seen or photographed by FIGU members for a long time, as we used to do. It has become too dangerous for us in this respect. Our presence has to remain undetectable. Because our directives have recently been updated, because certain foresights concerning the future of earthly humanity and the foreigners are very unpleasant and require a stricter observance of our instructions concerning our activity on the earth. The extension of our directives henceforth prohibits any possibility of observation or contact by technical tracking of our flying apparatus, nor by any sighting by Earth humans. And the present whom we call the foreigners because...
Excuse me, but I think you meant to say just now that shall not be called what is really behind them.
You say it. Consequently, I do not have to elaborate on what I actually wanted to say.
What has been said is also enough, but that you make an effort of observation concerning the foreigners, that may be said. May it not?
Yes, it does not necessarily have to be kept quiet, especially since you are now.
Could let the cat out of the bag.
Yes, something like that. For us, it is important that we fathom the activities of the foreigners very carefully, inside and out. Apart from the knowledge gained from this, we also know that we have to keep to what we have always maintained, namely that we remain unrecognized, both in relation to Earth's humanity and in relation to the foreigners, whose technology is very far behind ours, but whom they would inevitably want to get hold of if they could come into contact with us. We know very well their aspirations and are able to anticipate what would result from contact with them. In another respect, we are fully aware that all observations of Earth humans regarding the flying objects of the foreigners are consistently denied, concealed, commented on with flimsy lies, or judged as ridiculous by the responsible offices, etc. of the military, pilots, and private individuals. This is despite the fact that the observations are real and correspond to reality, as some of these sightings can also be documented on film or photographically. There are also scientists, etc., who are involved in ridiculing such effective sightings or falsely explaining them as natural phenomena, which in reality are not. And this happens in all states of the earth, also in your homeland, Switzerland, because...
You are not telling me anything new. Because it is not just me who knows this, because all of us at the center, as well as FIGU-oriented ones from outside, as well as certain witnesses from Schmidruti, can tell you a thing or two about it. The fact that the center and its surroundings are being monitored is already known around the world, and that they are even spying around here with drones and photographing everything from above. And even by people from foreign countries, we also know that.
This is not only due to a curious interest, but is also often due to fear. For this reason, a culture of fear of extraterrestrials has also been deliberately created from above, and this fear has spread among state leaders. That is why everything is concealed by the responsible agencies and state leaders, etc., especially by those of the USA secret government who...
I'm also aware of that, and
But what you are not supposed to mention openly, as well as some other statements not like...
I will just put my dots there again. But that is enough of what we have talked about. That really does not need to be continued.
Contact Report 831.
That is unfortunately the case, and very few who know the language really give it much thought. I wanted to say this once, whereby this also applies to the giants of whom I have spoken, whereby something is simply asserted as truth which does not correspond to it. If old things are found, then they are simply made to disappear, because people do not want to admit the truth.
That concerning the giants may be, but I have not read that far to say that it is as you say. But it is certainly so, otherwise you would not say it. But I still want to continue reading Father's annals, which are very extensive and will take a long time before they are all read. So I will say more about what I was talking about before. As my father wrote, the foreigners of that time, whose distant descendants can still be observed in earthly airspace, were of a female nature, but also male Earth humans in great numbers, who allowed themselves to be worshipped and glorified, but also built many buildings, etc., and taught Earth's humanity various forms of writing. Many of their buildings and other works were only possible because of their highly developed technological abilities and their potentialities. The foreigners, however, also exalted themselves above the Earth humans, but they also taught them a great deal about the cosmos and the stars, which Earth humans who were interested in them already dealt with in very early times. This, as well as the coming into existence of the Earth humans, which is different from what is wrongly taught on the Earth, is the actual origin of the coming into existence, as well as the origin of various races which are not of Earth origin.
I know that from Svath, but to make something like that comprehensible to the majority of Earthlings, that is still impossible. At least now, because first there must be... This also applies to the research being carried on in Greece, especially concerning the Minoans, the Taurus, etc., who, supported and guided by the foreigners of that time, created very remarkable buildings and made jewelry, about which the archaeologists of today are still puzzling over who actually made them, and where they came from, and so on. The fact that the ancestors of today's foreigners were the actual creators is something that especially those who carry a title and think they are clever, and think that they have eaten the knowledge with shovel diggers, and are even wise are unable to grasp due to their lack of understanding. This is also proven time and again when there is talk of UFOs. But this also includes those who cannot admit their idiotic knowing better, and their stupidity as a result of their cowardice, because they are only hypocritical and are therefore really of low intelligence.
It is always amazing to me how you are able to formulate everything. But what I still have to say is the following. Over thousands of years, Earth humans have, on their own initiative, imitated the constructions, etc., that were made by the ancestors of the foreigners in a primitive manner. Of course, this only succeeded to a certain extent, as the foreigners had done in earlier times, and we want to stick to this designation, because and it should also remain the case that they can never find out our presence, which is why my father, for understandable reasons of security, was already with you. Consequently, you are also, despite. So it is absolutely impossible that you will ever be, by even contrary to expectations, furthermore, it is to be mentioned that we Pleiaren have to adhere to the strict directive that we must keep away from the foreigners at all costs. Although they have developed their technology to such an extent that they could and can reach Earth and other worlds from the territory of their home stars, they are unable to penetrate our dimension of our universe. And we are obliged by our directives that the foreigners never find the possibility to advance, that is to say, penetrate into our dimension, because our, according to earthly time calculation, very laboriously won state of peace about 52,000 years ago could be endangered by intruders. We know that words and promises are not to be trusted, that treaties can be broken and discord can suddenly arise, which is why we act strictly according to our directives. Therefore, according to them, their directives, it has not been a given since time immemorial that we would make contact with the foreigners, nor will we do so at present or in the future. And furthermore, we would not give them the data and possibilities that would show them the way to our dimension. That is also the reason why already my father has regulated everything with you in such a manner that you yourself, consequently, you could never name anything that concerns us because everything is so.
Contact Report 832.
That's what I also think, and that's what a young man promised me. It was in the late 1940s or early 1950s when I met a young man with Svath who was interested in all sorts of things, which is why Svath showed him, on a chunk of meteorite, that life basically came to the Earth from outer space, that is to say from the cosmos, namely through meteorites that carried amino acids and microbes, etc. in them, from which life then developed in the course of time. This young man, I do not remember his exact name, Drac or Dake or something like that, note, Professor Michael, Professor Frank Donald Drake, astrophysicist, Cornell University, Ithaca, New York, who was dedicated to science, was very interested in everything, but I lost sight of him and I never saw him again. Svath said of him, however, that the young man would go his way and become well known. Unfortunately, however, I never heard from him. Perhaps he was ignored and laughed at, like all those who have actually seen real UFOs, with which the foreigners cruise around in the earthly atmosphere, which I was probably the first human being to photograph in Switzerland back in the 1950s, the photo then being published by the Tagesanzeiger and in the UFO News by Anna and Carl Veit.
Contact Report 833.
That will be good, for even the foreigners. Besides, it is also through Father's interventions and manipulations, as listed in his annals, that he has influenced and altered your DNA to such a youth preservation that in this respect, despite your old age, only your earthly age remains calculable.
You are right, so I will continue to remain silent. But it may well be said that the planetary warm period now coming and appearing is in every manner anthropogenic, and thus brought about by the machinations and culpability of the overpopulation of Earthlings. The climate change now advancing is bringing forth new heat-resistant vegetation, that is to say plants that hitherto grew in foreign countries and were hitherto brought to Switzerland as neophytes, and planted here and fought by the unintelligent, but which now inevitably have to change their ways. The non-Earth humans, and thus the ancestors of the foreigners, those of I warned of this and of overpopulation thousands of years ago, and declared that Earth's humanity should be kept on a small scale and not bred in excess. But this was thoroughly misunderstood by those idiots and self-seekers and elements and know-it-alls who pose as prophets and God's messengers, which is why they devised themselves as self-appointed wise men and God's commanders, and claimed the opposite of what was correct. So they falsified all the warnings of the Earth foreigners and lied out of it, "Go forth and multiply."
Contact Report 838.
That we Pleiaren actually do such things, you cannot know anything about that. However, since this universe and its dimension separate from ours is the only one in which we also move, we have a certain interest in knowing what is happening here. But we have directed this only towards the Earth, because for a reason known to you we have a relation to it, but not to the other systems and planets, etc., of this cosmos, although our distant ancestors have partly fathomed them. That our ancestors then brought the lineage of Nocodemion, and with it his teachings to Earth, that was a decision that was only taken about 190,000 years ago, when the Plejaren settlers on Earth began to cultivate the teachings of Nocodemion. This, while others from the depths of this universe had already been on the planet for a long time, but from whom the ancestors of the Plejaren kept away, which is also how it has remained. Consequently, the foreigners, as Ptah and you call them, had no knowledge of the Plejaren settlers until they were no more. This is also how it has remained ever since, up to the present time, with regard to our controlling presence. So it has always been so, and so it must remain, for we are not willing to deal with the wickedness of the state leaders and the bulk of Earth's humanity. Contact with earthly leaders was attempted only once through you, and as the first state with America, which we also wanted to extend to Russia and China as well as to all states of the Earth, as we were all informed about it. However, the whole attempt came to a miserable end before everything could really begin, because immediately demands were made on our behalf by the American state leadership via the American contact person at the time, which you had to pass on to us.
Contact Report 838.
This is understandable, and so your pardonless action was also unquestionably correct. If demands are simply made before even a conversation is brought about, then all is lost from the start, for such self-importance proves that instead of logic, understanding, reason, and peacefulness, there is always only the opposite up for discussion. Also no insight, but effectively only a will to command, a will to dictate, and an attitude of power. Interestingly enough, the truth is that this was also the case with the Giza intelligences, who were then deported by you Plejaren, because they reacted in the same manner as the Americans. But that the foreigners should not have known about the presence of the Giza and not have noticed anything, that seems strange to me.
But that was indeed the case. Everything could be done by us without the foreigners knowing anything about it, because they clearly did not even know that the Giza intelligences you mentioned existed and were spreading mischief, because the foreigners, as you and Ptah call them, are
Probably oriented about many things, but not about your presence, because you can completely shield yourselves against them with your apparatus. Am I right or am I wrong?
That is indeed so. Consequently, since time immemorial, they have never been able to detect our presence.
Again, that is correct.
I was already aware from Svath's explanations that the foreigners, who also existed then and even earlier, were not allowed to know about you, but I really did not know the whole of the turning and the effectual trappings. And as it is with me, I never asked to find out more because my motto has always been, what I do not know will not hurt me. So I also never ask what you have to do and where you are when you have to be away.
That was also not necessary before, but now comes up because you are asking about what comes up and what we have to do in terms of our duties. The fact is that we Plejaren came to Earth very early in ancient times and were active here and did many things without making ourselves known in any way to Earth's humanity. And the fact that we do not let ourselves be seen, just as we do not openly appear, keeps us well and safely free and able to move about without being hindered in our work. This also includes that we strictly keep away from the foreigners and also do not let them locate us or recognize us, which is also forbidden to us by our directives, but on the other hand also protects us by our technology.
The fact that the time has come for this, and that we are now talking about it so openly, I really wonder whether that is clever, because the foreigners, as well as certain kinds of earthlings, would like to know what is being played. Surely it is better if I make my points when I retrieve the report of the conversation.
That will not be necessary, for all that we have talked about becoming known means no danger to you or us. For your part, no information dangerous to our safety can be released, since you never ask what we do when we are away and where it is in each case. Moreover, and I know this very well, you would never let anything be known that would bring harm to us or to you. You are very conscientious and would never allow yourself to say anything that you are not supposed to say.
Of course not. Besides, I am not interested in disregarding secrets as such, and soreness never suited me anyway. Therefore, I do not ask about what you are doing and where you are at any given time, because just what I do not know will not hurt me. I also think that what is none of my business, I do not need to know, so I do not care if people tell lies about me, if stupid people hate me, insult me, and spread denials about me. I also do not care at all if certain persons make themselves big with what I tell them.
That is what used to be called, "You always hide your own light under a bushel."
It also does not shine so brightly that it would illuminate much far away.
But
Leave it, because it will not do any good.
You know, Florena, it is really useless to want to say something, but if I want to mention something concerning our task, it is effectively not based on interfering with the events of humanity here on Earth, but our presence has been directed since time immemorial solely towards observing and registering how everything is developing, because our peoples and Federation members are interested in how far everything has to go, until an overpopulation arises through a religious mania to the extent that such an overpopulation completely destroys a planet and all life. Even our peoples of our distant ancestors kept records of how everything developed in this cosmos of this universe on this world you call Earth. What we were able to ascertain was that already at the time, when foreigners came from the 7-star regions and did many things which pose many riddles for today's Earth humans, already at a very early time confused forms of belief developed from this, and the Earth humans regarded the foreigners as higher beings and accordingly worshipped them as gods. These were already the first forms of belief, from which, as a result of false ideas and inevitably resulting fantasies, in the course of time, what came into being as religion arose and has survived until today. The false meaning of the whole was then misunderstood under the name of religion, which was understood as regression, which was namely to lead back to the true origin of that from it a belief as well as a worship of those who had traveled far arose and came into being, in the manner that they were considered to be gods.
This has been stored, that is to say, eaten into the earthlings in such a manner that it gives them no peace day and night, and it still has an effect on them when they are asleep. Because the brain never switches off completely, not even at night in deep sleep, as I learned from Svayath. Thus the religious belief is maintained and is constantly present, even in sleep, because the awake part of the brain continues to work, and consequently also the belief and all the evil that it brings with it, such as hatred, murder and manslaughter, racial hatred, war and terror, revenge and retribution, etc., everything exactly as it is written in the early Holy Scriptures, the religious books. This has been tried to be trivialized and even erased since the beginning of the 18th century and up to the present time, namely by falsifying the so-called Holy Scriptures, even more than their lies and wild fantasies already are.
This is true, but the religionists and religious believers deny this truth. But with regard to the far-traveled and their worship and belief in them as gods, it was in time no longer avoidable that they were very quickly regarded as all-creating deities, and from this arose forms of belief that steadily deviated more and more from the effective reality and truth. Fantasy ideas were given a place, which were completely separated from all that really was. From this developed just as quickly a primal belief in a divine power attributed to the distant travelers, because the distant travelers were able to do all kinds of things, such as technically conditioned miracles of buildings, etc., which were considered as such at that time, because they appeared as such to the Earth humans, because they themselves were not capable of doing so, just as they also did not have the necessary abilities, knowledge, techniques and apparatus and devices, etc. This inevitably led the believing Earth humans to a thesis which we call a confused recollection thesis, because it developed as a delusion which, due to faith, was such that it was assumed that the Earth human descended from the far-traveled gods at an earlier time as a creation. Thus, the senses of Earth humans took hold of this thesis and, depending on their faith, formed it into what in the course of time resulted in the most diverse religions, as a result of which to this day only a small percentage of Earth humans still find themselves capable of thinking for themselves and not believing in a god. In relation to Earth humans who had traveled far away, this already brought doom to peoples of a distant world in ancient times, because they acted in the same way as the majority of Earth humans do today, with their diverse religious beliefs. The far travelers had found the planet Earth at that time because they followed the path of the space entity that entered this universe from our space-time structure and settled them in this solar system. And
You are not saying anything new, Florena, because the religious nonsense is so deeply anchored in these airheads that they cannot think at all and cannot even think. Consequently, their whole brain corresponds to nothing more and nothing less than a nut full of faith, into which nothing more of reality and its truth can penetrate. But I do not really want to talk about that, because I am interested in other things, such as how you manage technically with your security against the foreigners, so that they cannot locate you. Svath had already avoided them, and always said that it was impossible for them to ever register you, not even if his beamship was visible to me, because even then, it would remain invisible and undetectable to the foreigners. He also always told me not to react when we together or I alone observed an unknown flying object. If I think of the Giza twerps alone, I often wondered how you were able to protect yourselves from being noticed by the foreigners. Nor did they seem to know of the presence of the wicked and evil intelligences down there, which is still a mystery to me, as is much else in connection with the fact that the foreigners could never ascertain your presence. I recall from my subconscious that it was around the beginning of May 1978 when we, Guido, Hans and Coney, were concreting the center. Guido and I saw a bright, large oval yellow object, slowly moving from the west to the east, over Schmidruti, to which Guido said that we were probably being watched by the foreigners. This was precisely because it was not a Pleiaren beamship, which he knew well by sight, because at that time Simya, Sai, Pleja, and Quetzal were still sometimes seen.
I'm afraid I do not know anything about that. But about our camouflage, because of which the foreigners have always been unable to locate us, nothing must become known, which is why I can only talk to you about it in private. You shall know, of course, but you must not and never speak openly of it.
I will abide by this and bury everything so deeply within me, in such a way that it cannot be brought out of me in any manner. So far I have never asked about it, not even with Svath, which is why I really do not know anything about your shielding technique. All I know is that you shield yourselves against any tracking and there is nothing.
You must also never make any promises in that regard.
I certainly will not, and I do know the way that would stop me from saying anything or just releasing it, as well as that it would not work to say anything if I were drugged or hypnotized.
I am aware of that because
Correct. But it is very interesting that the foreigners did not even know, as you say, that the Giza twerps had been on Earth for a long time and were up to their mischief.
that is indeed what happened.
Contact Report 841.
The phantasmagoria of space travel is also of no use here, because until it is finally so far that the Earthling can travel in space, which only begins outside the Sol system, and not already outside the Earth's gravity, a great deal of time will pass if the foreigners from outside do not intervene and help the crazy Earth's humanity, or enslave and abduct them.
Contact Report 844.
In addition to all this, I think it should be mentioned that if the foreigners, who were already spread all over the earth in ancient times, and some of whose distant ancestors in the Indus Valley in Pakistan did something that could have been avoided if pure reason had prevailed there too, but which is obviously lacking in all human life forms, then many things would have been different since time immemorial. But ignorance and imprudence are a fact that must also be attributed to the old and new foreigners, even if they were technically far ahead of the Earthlings and are still ahead today. They have been circling around in earthly airspace since time immemorial, and thus since time immemorial. But nevertheless, they have nothing to do with what is attributed to them in connection with certain Earthlings. But this brings me to something I want to ask you. What do you think it is to assume that other and unknown foreigners are trying to spy on us in the center? Every now and then, figures and objects appear out of nowhere and disappear again, and I wonder where they come from. They are certainly not the foreigners we know. It's enough that every now and then helicopters of the...
I know that. But with the figures and the objects, that is unknown to me. And I am also hearing something from you in that regard for the first time.
It has happened several times, which I did not tell you before, that suddenly some figures and objects materialized out of nowhere around the house and disappeared again without a trace. Our surveillance cameras must have picked up on this each time, but they did not record anything, so there is no visual evidence.
That is strange. We also did not notice that a grouping of unknown foreigners... No, I cannot imagine that the foreigners we know are with you. No, they are certainly not interested.
Contact Report 848.
Yes. But it will remain absolutely useless for them, because there is no possibility whatsoever that we can be elicited. Not even the foreigners, despite their technological advances in terms of quantum technology and nanotechnology and so on, are able to locate our flying apparatus or ourselves.
I know that. That it is impossible to locate you at all. Also for the foreigners, and even more so for... But let's leave that, because we have talked about it many times, and it has been of no use. All spying is still being done, also with drones, as I noticed myself, which, by the way, have recently been attacked by birds, as Ptah said some time ago. Apparently they see the drones as enemies or something, which is why they want to attack and displace them or finish them off. The fact that human beings began to believe in a higher might was the result of natural phenomena, and the illusions associated with them, which is actually still explicable and understandable. But the fact that the foreigners who came to Earth from the far reaches of space were then idolized as gods by the Earthlings in their ignorance, and are still idolized today, albeit modified in terms of religion to a dear god in the main religions, such as in Catholicism, Protestantism, and all the thousand-fold Christian sects, is truly only a delusion, but one that has brought disaster upon Earth's humanity to this day. The Pleiaren have never done anything to interfere in earthly affairs since time immemorial, when they first came here to Earth, as they do not to this day. Contrary to the foreigners, as we call those who came here from the far reaches of space at very early times and are still in earthly space, the Pleiaren have never been active or otherwise noticeable on Earth in any manner. Billy.
Contact Report 849.
Good. Then I also have the following to say. We too, like the foreigners, have small and very small objects which we use for reconnaissance tasks, but ours are not in spherical form, as these are often used by the foreigners as observation and reconnaissance objects in various sizes and light emitting. And what I have to emphasize expressly, as Ptah wishes, relates to us the fact that there is no relevance whatsoever between the foreigners and us Pleiaren, for we have always kept ourselves absolutely concealed from them in such a wise that they are neither able to see, hear, nor locate us. His has also proved to be the case with Earth humans in general, which means that we must not only speak of those responsible for the state, because, as we had to recognize, the majority of the entire Earth's humanity tends towards power, revenge, and killing as soon as something comes up. Only a small part of the whole of Earth humanity is free from these ambitions, for as we have clearly discovered, This striving is deeply anchored in the bulk of Earth humans. And this is also a great danger for the foreigners who, in order to get hold of them, are not only attacked with weapons, but also become hostile, that which, however, you should not mention openly. The W is or else will, but all this you must not name when you call up the conversation. Therefore, it will be necessary for you to.
That's where I will just put dots.
That will be good. But the following is also to be said, which is just as desired by Ptah as all that I have said so far. Our ancestors were never involved in bringing any religions to earth, just as no buildings, etc. were created by them, as the earlier foreigners did on the other hand, and elevated themselves above Earth's humanity. But the foreigners were never so stupid as to supply Earth humans with weapons, as the stupid leaders of many states have been doing for some time now, with the help of equally stupid sections of the population with regard to the Ukraine, and have thereby provoked, are leading, and are continuing to maintain a world war of a special kind.
There are many things being done wrongly here on Earth, also concerning the so-called important space technology, which is based on rocket propulsion research. With that, precisely with rocket propulsion, the heads only get into Earth orbit, but not out into space, which begins very far outside the solar system. Moreover, earthly research is still very far from what is needed to fly through space, and also not with anti-gravity propulsion, because that is of no use in space either, because there is nothing there that anti-gravity could repel. The fact that the foreigners do not whiz around in earthly airspace with anti-gravity propulsion, but why Krukar does not make sense to those who should actually think a little further than those who do not understand anything at all about locomotion technology in airspace and in the void of space. Also, when I observe the ridiculous and dangerous efforts that are being made to capture the foreigners, I have to grab my head and ask myself how lowly intelligent and dim-witted one must actually be to believe that contact with the foreigners could be established by firing at them. The whole thing is a hostility without equal, and brings about exactly the opposite of what should be expected. So the whole thing is a completely wrong attitude and approach, which brings more harm than success, as is unfortunately usual with the Earthling. But they will experience that sooner or later. But I have something else. There were Americans here as these have made films and photos, and that which not only reveals the low intelligence and dim-wittedness. But what do you say to that? For my part, I think it does not get any more stupid and obvious than that.
Contact Report 856.
But that is not all. For my father wrote, and this is what I want to speak to you about specifically, namely, that you also made studies concerning the foreigners and observed many things for this purpose in very ancient times, and that they not only erected very great buildings by sound vibrations, but also brought medical knowledge to Earth. But these have been lost and forgotten in the course of the millennia that have passed, just as the great foreigners Horus, Dhanvantari, Thor, etc. have been. I'm also very interested in what my daughter Simyase told me, what she did with you. How you got to know the men Ketch, Duramke, Forestal and Area 18, as well as Gejat, Merlin and the foreigners working on Earth at that time, etc. And what they told you before the foreigners left, and the Earth humans known to you were all murdered by the secret services of the USA, and I want to know a lot more from you than what I can only read in the annals. The foreigners have been around for thousands of years, and will probably also stay around. But we have always kept away from them for certain reasons, including their homeworlds in this cosmos. With regard to them, the whole thing will become acutely topical in America, and enlightenment will be demanded. Because you together, you, Father, and you, have created clarifications at very early times in the past, with regard to which I want to learn a little more from you. Especially, however, about their highly developed medicine, because as a physician I am particularly interested in this, as also in how the early foreigners taught their knowledge on Earth to those who were suitable for it. I am also interested in what is written in the annals concerning new diseases and viruses that will spread on Earth, especially in the new millennium. My daughter and Asket also told me some of the things you noticed and saw concerning the foreigners in E, for I do not have much knowledge of that. I am also informed about what my daughter was able to find out in concerning the professional photographer and expert for professional image processing, who faked your slides, partly very much, others only a little, as well as that he did not do this voluntarily, but because he was forced to do so with death threats. Otherwise
However, what relates to the background of things and truths concerning the foreigners, as well as concerning the unpacking and real truth of those earthlings who were under the oath of secrecy of the effective truth, but broke this oath towards Sfath and me, as well as towards Simya-Se, Asket, and Quetzal, is something that typically shows the depravity of certain earthlings. This is because practically all those we visited unexpectedly and suddenly were murdered by Secret Service agents. Unfortunately, on Earth, it is the case with certain people that the knowledge and the word of the knowledge of secret things, when let out, leads to the persecution and killing and murdering of those who do not keep silent, or about whom alone there is the possibility that they will speak sooner or later. In the Earthling, knowledge alone, but also a suspicion about something, leads to hatred, slander, persecution, murder and manslaughter, and destruction. There have been many reports and countless examples of this since time immemorial, which have not only led to hatred, war, and destruction, for example through presumptions or stories concerning fertile countries. Countries where supposedly milk and honey flow, gold fever, knowledge of the effective truth, knowledge of secrets, knowledge concerning the value of herbs, which, for example, became witchcraft mania and cost X thousands of human lives, who were put to death by torture, drowning, stabbing to death, hanging, quartering and burning, etc. Knowledge is dangerous for the human beings of the earth, for if a human being knows something true and has true knowledge of any kind, he will be persecuted and possibly killed. Thus, however, hatred arises against every human being who knows something true, whereby he is persecuted and possibly even killed and murdered for it. Therefore, every human being on earth lives in danger of his life if he reveals his knowledge in any process, for his fellow human beings have their eyes and ears open, and depending on what their thoughts and aspirations are, their reaction will be positive or negative.
Contact Report 857.
Perhaps it will be understood in the distant future, but what has been so ingrained from time immemorial, such as religions, is something that the earthlings will not be able to free themselves from so quickly, and consequently hatred, revenge, war, and destruction will continue to be rampant on Earth. Since the earthlings have made gods and religions out of the foreigners and those who have come from far away, and have also sparked religious wars out of them and demanded human sacrifices in their delusion of God, this delusion of religions has remained until today. The majority of the Earth's population is delusional about religion and effectively resists reality and its truth.
Contact Report 858.
I once talked about this many years ago with Asina, the very amphibian woman who, amazingly enough, used about the same language as you are using now. Asina was a very special being and came from a people who called themselves Dogon or something like that, as she also said another name, but I do not remember the context. And she also told me that her very early ancestors were able to cross over into the Anchor universe and then emigrated there, from a planet in our cosmos, from a system that was about 8 or 9 light years away from Earth, and had a large sun that could be seen from Earth. However, there was another small structure near this system that could not be seen from Earth with the naked eye. From this system, that is to say from its planets, various beings, that is to say species or so of amphibian people, but also other human beings, etc., had come to Earth thousands of years ago, and as she knew, Their most distant descendants were still here, with whom, however, for some reason unknown to me, they did not want to maintain any contact. And when I think about what Asina said about this, I think about the foreigners and the UFOs that are observed again and again all over the world. I did not want to say that at the time, but now it is perhaps interesting to know for those who want to know where Asina's distant ancestors actually came from. This, as well as what else she said, is interesting, namely that today's descendants of the dog have had no connection with the Dogon, that is to say with Asina's people, for more than 800,000 years. Asina's people, who, she said, actually call themselves Dogon, according to the ancient term dog, belong to the Plejaren Federation. And what else is to be said? These creatures, which look like reptiles, are those who, however, as Asina said, have changed tremendously physically and no longer bear any resemblance to those who emigrated to the Anchor universe ages ago. And Asina only came to Earth and to me because she was otherwise already in our universe, and that was because she was supposed to investigate what is happening there today in the system that is 8 or 9 light years or so away from Earth, and is actually the true origin of the Dogon. But now enough of all that Asina told me, then now this.
Contact Report 860.
Now, the naming of Emmanuel was always, and from the very beginning alone, correct, but not the false and invented naming Jesus Christ. Emmanuel's name was already in use since ancient times, that is to say, at the time of the original Hebrews, who were called Hebrea, and of which the distant descendants, today's believers in the Jews, no longer know anything, because there are absolutely no more traditions about it. This people was led at that time by a rather deep black African called Avian, in the land of Pecht. The original leader was a very distant Negrid descendant of a very small black-skinned Plejaren group that settled in Africa more than 13,500 years ago as immigrants and mixed with Earth's humanity, but kept away from the foreigners so that they never noticed that Plejaren were on this world. The foreigners, who had been on Earth for a very long time, and whose distant homeland was 8 or 9 light years away from our world, did not realize the presence of the few Plejaren, whose descendants died out completely in the course of time.
That is correct. But since you have spoken of the early immigrants from one of our worlds, as of the foreigners from whom even our very distant ancestors kept aloof, let me remind you of what you were instructed to do by the committee when you—
You shall not speak of this, as we agreed. Not everything has to be said because there are only a lot of questions that are not supposed to be answered, so it is better to be silent. Besides, malicious people also turn it into lies again.
Yes, of course. Sometimes, well, I was a bit hasty with my words. Sometimes one speaks without paying particular attention to prudence or what was once discussed. Excuse me, please, for being—
It is good. I also feel that way sometimes. Sometimes you don't realize until it is too late that you have said one word too many. It is human nature. On the other hand, I know what I was told, that it should be pointed out worldwide, by a separate special announcement, that you, that is to say you Plejaren, have nothing to do with the foreigners and their UFOs. However, this very thing has been mentioned 2 or 3 times recently in our conversations, which is why I think it should actually suffice.
While it is correct that this has been talked about, the committee now finds it imperative, as you should be aware, that it has ordered something specific in this regard. Namely, so that no misunderstandings arise, that we Plejaren have nothing whatsoever to do with the so-called UFOs and their crews. We Plejaren keep away from them, and also do not allow Earth humans to observe us through the appearance of our flying apparatus in the airspace. We also do not allow ourselves to be located, observed, or otherwise elicited by the foreigners in any manner, which has been so held since time immemorial, for we Plejaren are not interested in any life forms from this Dern universe realm entering the realm of our Ankar universe realm of creation.
Contact Report 861.
You could probably mention that, because in this respect there are only secrets among the most diverse military, who also deny everything that has to do with UFOs. Also, the fact that we have nothing to do with these foreigners and can neither be seen nor located, we have already discussed this several times, so this should actually be known. We and have nothing to do with UFOs or other phenomena, as well as with those that come from other dimensions of this Dern universe, and effectively do not come from our Ankar universe. This also applies to various illusions, and many also correspond to other phenomena of various kinds, which are often based on imaginations, illusions, or simply fantasies. We are also aware that the foreigners have no idea or knowledge of the fact that creation contains 7 universes, each of which has 1,000 different dimensions, which can also be visited and traveled to by means of certain techniques, and can therefore be changed from one dimension to another. So we have the comprehensive certainty that the foreigners know nothing about our Ankar universe, as that creation contains and exhibits 7 independent universes in itself, which are differently dimensioned than the innumerable dimensions of this Dern universe. But all this is known to you, because I know that Svath has already taught you about it.
Contact Report 862.
We Plejaren, however, do not come to Earth to make contact with Earth humans, and indeed, we do not want anything from them. Just as we do not want to make contact with that is to say, the foreigners, as we call them. But we only come here because you teach and spread the teaching of Nocademion, which has been established since time immemorial, to Earth humans. To do something like this was decided some 25 million years ago by our distant ancestors of that time, even though they themselves had succumbed to most of the same evils as the human beings on this world Earth did later. But the righteous of the peoples of that time already determined the becoming of the mission on this world in this Dern universe about 25 million years ago, and the decision at that time actually outlasted the time of 25 million years. Consequently, however, more than 50,000 years ago, the decision that had survived until then was also taken up, and it was decided that the request that had been made at that time should now be put into practice. Consequently, everything was prepared in such a manner that what was decided could come about. Then everything was arranged at the exact time that the intended mission could begin, and thus the teaching of the truth, teaching of the creation energy, teaching of the life, could find its beginning on this world, which signifies the real life of the human being, whose path he is to follow and the value he is to develop within himself and become truly human beings. But this causes much more difficulties and permanent crushes than were expected, for more and more influence is exerted by the religions, just as for some time now the foreigners have also been making themselves more and more felt, acting as gods, which is why the killing of human beings began, who were intended as offerings to the gods. This was because the foreigners did not intervene and did not stop the horrors in this regard, although they came here and demanded that human beings should not be sacrificed or killed in any other way. This, however, gave rise to new strife among the human beings in this world, for the views developed that under all circumstances the statements of the foreigners had to be given conscientious consideration, which ultimately led to delusional ideas that these statements corresponded to a commandment and law and were classified accordingly, with the meaning that severe punishments were to be meted out if they were violated. On the one hand, this was a misunderstanding of the whole, and on the other hand, only the killing of those who violated it was appropriate. So it was not far off that human sacrifices were quickly demanded and offered in order to win the conscientious attention of the foreigners, that is to say, gods, and to reassure them when what they claimed to do correctly was violated. But how they taught and demanded not to kill was misunderstood by human beings and, moreover, disregarded, so that people did not think and act according to the true meaning. Killing thus became a case of quick revenge and retribution from time immemorial, and this in turn gave rise to hatred, hence also wars, terror, degeneracy, destruction, extermination, and murder, etc. Faith-wise, everything in this regard was spread and practiced very quickly. Thus, through the appearance and the misleading teaching of the foreigners to the earth humans, exactly the wrong thing was done, which has been preserved until today, namely, that which should never become with the human beings, namely, a faith in place of thinking for oneself and grasping reality and truth. Yet, this is not only the case on Earth, but also with every species of human being in the other 6 universes of creation, and on the inhabited worlds, as also with all life forms which are of human-like genus and species. This because a natural instinct of self-preservation is inherent in thinking human beings, or human-like, and likewise thinking beings, which, however, as a result of the possible, independent, wrong thinking in a completely wrong final evaluation, misinterprets and misapplies the whole understanding, whereby the human being wrongly considers the instinct of killing for the procurement of food, also in excitement and for self-preservation, as a justified legal action. As a result, he does not make an effort to work out his worthiness of humanity, and consequently he reacts in an abusive and dehumanizing manner, whereby killing cannot leave him, and he cannot become a real human being.
Contact Report 864.
Well, what the foreigners know about it, I do not know, but Ptah told me that they know about it. But they are not supposed to know anything about the Giza intelligences, because these have always remained hidden from the foreigners, because they have kept back from them, just like the Pleiaren. Furthermore, what I also recently learned from Ptah, they were from the Ankar universe, and came from there to Earth. This because they destroyed their home planet themselves in their evilness, which is why they came here by the old route. Meanwhile, since being taken away and brought back, they are free, but inaccessible to flight technology on a world of the Pleiaren Federation, and under constant supervision. Consequently, they can do no more harm. Ptah explained that their viciousness has not diminished. Consequently, they are still of the same mind as before.
I'm aware of everything in this regard.
I think so, for it was a Pleiaren action when these twerps were taken away, which also the foreigners could not perceive, as Ptah said. Consequently, they never knew anything about you Pleiaren and also about the twerps in Giza and their evil machinations. Perhaps they know, however, that the pyramids are many thousands of years older than Earthlings claim, but that is not really important. The fact that they were built in a different manner than, for example, elsewhere whole villages and cities were built with correct bricks, which are still produced and used today, as they were 12,000 years ago and so on. That is a peculiarity, as is also the case with the giant stones, which not only weighed many tons, and some of which weighed well over 1,200 tons, and were cut to size with such millimeter precision, that not even a hair could be poked between them when they were put together. This should actually give the archaeologists pause for thought, but it does not, because unfortunately they do not want to know the truth, but indulge in fantasies. In any case, Ta explained in this regard, I mean because of the Giza intelligences, that the foreigners really had absolutely no knowledge that they, that is to say Uplayaren, were on Earth at all and had been since time immemorial. Your locating technology defense is such, as Simya say, already explained, as Ptah also confirmed, that you can never be located with the best equipment and devices in this respect, not to mention earthly attempts of this kind. Our military is also incapable of this, because all earthly tracking technology is still so primitive that it is pointless to even talk about it. It is true that attempts are made again and again to locate you, or even to get hold of you, but this is as pointless as if water were carried into the Rhine to make it overflow. There is even photographic evidence that the surveillance is actually taking place, although everything is denied through all the grounds, as also the fact that back in my winkle, a jet fighter followed Simya-se for about 10 minutes, as she visibly circled around for a long time with her beamship, and then simply disappeared, and that after I was still able to take a photo, whereby I was able to photograph Simya-se's beamship and the jet fighter together.